You know that the best way to mill grain while preserving its nutrient content is to grind it between two big stones. All these flowers in front of me were stone ground by Kenyon's grist mill. We visited Kenyons to learn how they grind grain the old-fashioned way, between stones. On the banks of the Queens River in South Kingston, Rhode Island, sits an old grist mill. It was built in the late 19th century, but milling on this site dates back to 1711. Originally powered by water, the mill switched to electricity in the late 1930s. The mill is named for C.D. Kenyon, who purchased the business in 1909 and was the first miller here to package the cornmeal in small boxes for individual consumers. Today, Kenyon's owner, Paul Drum, ships thousands of little bags of cornmeal as well as many other flours and mixtures to stores all across the country. Like his father, Paul II, who owned the mill before him, he enjoys the process of making wholesome, nutrient-rich flours.
Stone grinding keeps intact all the nutritional qualities of the grain that you start with. Unlike the steel roller mills and the modern milling that you find today, which is a process that strips down the product bit by bit, and then they reconstitute it to make a whole grain.
The grinding process is actually quite simple, and it's all about the stones. Kenyons are made of 150-year-old granite and weigh more than 2,000 pounds apiece. The bottom stone is called the nether stone, and the top is called the runner.
We get the grain in, and we dump it into our hoppers. Comes down into the mill, where it's stopped up by a piece called a shoe. The shoe actually allows us to adjust the feed of grain into the mill. It's agitated by a wooden spindle, which is called a damsel, and that taps it a little bit so that it'll fall a little bit at a time into the mill. We only have two adjustments. It's the rate of feed of the grain into the stone and also the aperture, the space between the two stones. We have a tenoring wheel that allows us to raise and lower the top stone. That allows us to adjust the grind so that we can make it more coarse or a little bit finer. After the grain has passed through the two sets of stones, it jets out the side where it falls out a little chute, and we collect it out in barrels where it can be packaged straight away or put into other products in mixes and blends and so forth.
Over time, the grinding process wears down the granite, so every few months, the stones need to be sharpened.
We have to take all the wooden work off the top. We take the yoke, which is a big arch-shaped unit, and place it over the stone. We raise that top stone up and swing it out of the way. We flip it over and bring it back so that we can expose the grinding surface of the stone.
Perfect.
What we do at that point is we have to use various tools, and we sharpen or peck the stone.
Now that the easy part of the job has been done, moving the stone and flipping it over, I get down to the real work. Now, years ago, they used to use these steel rods. They would be sharpened and then heat-treated and forged, and a bundle tied together, and they would beat on the face of the stone to get it roughened. But that was a lot of work, and the Yankees are notoriously lazy. They call it Yankee ingenuity, but it's just because of laziness. He came up with this multi-bladed hammer called a mill pack. And the proper use of it was to raise the hammer and let it go, and it would leave a series of little grooves.
Furrows or channels are what carry the ground corn out from between the stones. They also allow air to circulate. Grist mills have influenced more than just the grains we eat.
A lot of phrases in the English language come from the grist mills, the most famous of which is keep your nose to the grindstone. And that meant the miller kept his nose smelling to make sure that the stones are not hitting. Once they start to hit, they spark, and it can cause an explosion, which will many times ruin the mill, and sometimes the miller was killed.
Fortunately, every miller at Kenyons has always kept his nose to the grindstone. And Paul III is happy to be here, carrying on an old-world technique. Next, we'll show you a traditional Rhode Island recipe made with one of Kenyon's most popular products. A friend of the Drum family has been making traditional corn cakes called Johnny cakes since he was a small boy. He shared his recipe with us.
And it's made from white, stone ground flint corn. I have a cup of meal in here. I'm going to add a teaspoon of sugar, half a teaspoon of salt.
To this, Richard adds about a cup of boiling water.
This needs to sit a little while. It's going to taste better. The meal will absorb the moisture. Now, time to use the griddle. A little oil. This is a Teflon coated surface. Don't use a cast aluminum griddle, or you'll never get the Johnny cake off. Even though it's Teflon, I like to oil the griddle a little bit. You get a better crust on the outside of that Johnny cake. The ideal Johnny cake, as far as I'm concerned, has a nice crust on either side, but it's still a little bit soft on the inside. Now I'm cooking at around 380 degrees. Let me put one on first with the larger spoon. Now that's all right if you're going to serve them at home and everybody's going to eat them for breakfast. But most of the time, you're going to serve them to friends or you're going to have them at an afternoon. Use the iced teaspoon, and it makes a wonderful size. Now, they stay on there until they're brown around the edges. This is a drying out process rather than a cooking process. When I added the boiling water to the meal, it's a scalded meal, so that's edible. This is drying out to make that cake travelable. And that's when the colonists took the cornmeal mush, dried it out on the griddles that they brought from Europe, and made it travelable. They carry these in a leather pouch, and they took them on their journey. They pronounced it Jarney. And after a while, the R's got dropped, and Jarney cake became Johnny cake. At least that's the story that I have been told. I'm going to turn one over a little on the early side, just so you can start to see something underneath. There's a little mark on it, and that's from the drawing up of the spoon. When you paint a house and you leave a void, it's called a holiday. But on the underside of a Johnny cake, it's called a smile. And there usually is one on every Johnny cake.
Richard tops the Johnny cakes with a blend of whipped butter and maple syrup.
Oh, I can't wait to taste these. They smell so good. They taste even better. And there's a particular way to eat a Johnny cake when they're this small and this beautiful. Ready? Next step. And we always say, ah.